Anyway, it is great to be here today with you, and I greatly appreciate the honor of speaking to you. First, to talk to you a little bit about my novel, The Last American President, and what motivated us and what the message is about, and then to accomplish the task that we have at hand for tonight's meeting, and that is, of course, to commemorate, appreciate, and in many ways model our future lives after the example of Ms. Schlafly. But, people say, well, first off, you write a book and it gets published, and it is such an honor and such a tremendous experience to have people come up and pay for it and then ask you to sign it. Like, this is, wow, And I remember right after the book came out, just very short period of time after the book came out, it's somebody's, and it's set just for me. So it stopped. But now I lost some of the audience, so that works. Right after the book came out, and I was monitoring the sales of the paperback and hardcovers, and they were, it was very new, and they were modest at first. But the sales of the online versions, the ebooks, are very much delayed. I still had not gotten a single report on online sales. But I was just going about my normal day. I was, in this particular situation, one evening, just going to an IHOP in Oklahoma City. So I pulled my vehicle up to the IHOP, I get out, and I'm walking towards the IHOP, and a customer from the IHOP was walking the other direction, a 20-ish young lady, and she's just walking right towards me, beelining right towards me. And as she approached, I figured she had a car the same direction where my car had been. She comes right up to me, says, "OMG, I can't believe it's you." And I was like, "Really? Okay. Can I have your autograph?" And I thought, wow, the online sales must be a lot better than I thought. Wow, and she didn't have a copy of the book, and I didn't have a copy of the book. But I did have, because my wife told me to always have my autograph pen. So I pulled it out and I said, "Sure, do you have something to write on?" And, I don't know why, but she was one of those that has the great big purse. And she took both of her hands, literally took both of her hands and dove them into her purse and started shifting around. And she pulls out, again, I don't know why she had this in her purse, a piece of cardboard. Like you would have on the back side of a legal pad. And she pulls it out, but it was cut even. And she says, "Here you go." It's like, okay. And I asked her name and, to Tammy or whatever it was, I don't remember. Best wishes, and then signed it. And if any of you, well, I know Mark has seen my autograph, cannot read my signature.
Like a doctor. Doctor signature.
And signed it and gave it to her. And she says, "Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you." And she looked at it. And she looked at it. And she looked at it. Finally, she's turned it to me and points and says, "How does that say, Billy Bob Thornton?"
Oh my goodness. Oh, you look like Billy Bob Thornton.
I just said stage name and went to that house.
Oh, yeah. You do look similar.
Billy Bob Thornton.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Oh well.
Do you get that a lot?
Just kind of destroys the whole, feeling.
That's funny.
Do you
But,
get that a lot?
Actually, yes.
Yeah, I thought, yeah.
So,
Well, I asked for Richard's autograph tonight, and I got it.
yeah, and it does not look like Billy Bob
I'm proud
Thornton.
of it.
But, people say, why would you write a book called The Last American President? Some people look at that and they don't know it's fiction. They say, well, that must be a book about George W. Bush, because they're pretty certain the one we have now is not American. But and then I tell them, no, it's fiction, and it's set slightly in fiction. Like, it's kind of a depressing thought, the last American president. Why would you do that? Yeah, I can understand that, but let me tell you that it's a story of, it follows the life of the man who becomes the very final president of the United States of America. And he's a good guy. You'll like him. He does everything he can to preserve the Union. Okay, gets rid of entire departments of the federal government. Does so many of the right things, but unfortunately, by the time he gets there, it's just a little bit too late. Again, he's a good guy. It follows his life. His life, by the way, Pittsburgh, Kansas is where he's from, which is where my family farm is. Marries a girl from here in Wichita, and wanted to place it in a very salt-of-the-earth part of the world that I'm familiar with. So I put it here in Kansas, rather than a little bit more southern attitude in my own Oklahoma. But I also have a lot of familiarity here, so it worked. I have other characters from Oklahoma and other places in which I've lived and have familiarity. But, I think you'll notice some of the things and a lot of the staging, a lot of the things happening here in Kansas that'll make a lot of sense to you. But, it follows his life, and so it's got, humor, it's got romance, it's got personal tragedy. You'll laugh, you'll cry. It also has political intrigue, betrayal, all set against the backdrop of the dissolution of the United States of America. And, it's a cautionary tale. And the purpose of a cautionary tale is to caution against the very premise of the book. We don't want this to happen, in case you don't know. It's not something I would eagerly seek, having the dissolution of the United States of America. But unfortunately, in many ways, I'm concerned it's what we are aiming towards. I'm concerned that the very thing that we're supposed to be salt and light and do things to preserve our founding fathers' vision for what America was to be are largely falling by the wayside. And I'm very concerned for the fate of our nation. And so I wrote this story for that purpose. But I also wrote it, and you'll notice when you read it, it's a good story, it's an enjoyable story. But I wrote it with a moral that gives you a very different, hopeful, and positive view of what it means to be an American. So I have it available for you, and I do hope you'll pick it up. And if you look on the back, you'll notice it says $28.95, and that's what it sells for at bookstores, Barnes & Noble, Amazon.com, etc. And the paperbacks are $14.95. And our publisher said that when I speak, I can sell the hardcover or the paperback for $15. And that would be cash, check, or credit card, because got the square, so you can use a credit card. And the nice thing about when you pay $15 for it, and they see on the back it's $28.95, if you buy it for a gift, they'll think you paid twice as much. So I do hope you'll enjoy it, and I do want to hear from you what you think about it when you do. But let's get to the real purpose of why we're here, and that's to commemorate the life and the work of Phyllis Schlafly. And I will tell you that there are many people I know personally, who have known Phyllis better and longer than I did. And so again, I take it as a great honor and a privilege to have an opportunity to speak on that relatively limited role and input and connection I had to the greatest American woman in politics in generations. And one of those people who does indeed know her better, of course, is a different former National Federation Republican Assembly's president. That's Rod Martin, who actually co-authored a book with her. But we both have known her a long time. She kind of had an opportunity to guide me a bit and help me in becoming a member of the Council on National Policy, which is not well known, but those who do often call it the vast right-wing conspiracy. Okay, it is a coalition of very strong conservative leaders, and because of her, I was able to become a member of that as well during my tenure as president of the NFRA. And I had opportunities to speak to her Engle Forum groups in St. Louis, and she took opportunities to speak to the NFRA board meetings at other times, and so there was a nice interchange. And you have those public events and those public times, and they're great. But I'll tell you, it's those odd little intimate personal times that you have when you're talking to somebody that is a national figure that's been on TV, since he was not only alive but as young as that picture shows, and has influenced American policy for all these decades. And the type of person she is, can't help but say is. And the impact she had, and she didn't change. She was always Phyllis. She was always the same woman. not a woman you want to cross, not a woman you want to do something that she considers the least bit not quite right, which I did too. And it's like, here's a woman who's very slight. And I'm not. Okay. And she scared the bediddling out of me when I did something that was not a big deal. But it's like, you just don't do what she doesn't think is proper for a second. And she'll put you in line, and you'll be there, and glad to be there. And you won't get out of it again. So, and I won't go into details on that, but that experience, the strength and the certainty and the conviction came out in every single thing she did. But also the independence and the, picking her up at the airport. And I was like, okay, I'm on it. I get to pick her up at the airport, take her to her hotel, take her around to interviews. And I'm standing at the exit of the security area, and here comes this 90-year-old lady, okay, walking faster than I walk when I walk fast, okay, with her own luggage, of course, and not much, packed, I don't know how, but, and she just comes out, and I said, Miss Schlafly, and she says, yes, is it this way? And she's, and I gotta run. And then we start talking a little bit, and it's never was turned off. Always the same exact person, always committed, always doing the same thing, always certain in the truth of what she believed in and the purity of the constitutional founding principles of the United States. Never backing down, never backing down a bit. Let me say that Phyllis Schlafly did in her years so much to define what it means to be a conservative. Because without her, conservative in America would refer to fiscal conservative issues. And that's fine. Maybe conservative ideals when it comes to foreign policy. But that would be the limit of it. If it weren't for Phyllis Schlafly, the ideal of conservative principles would have nothing to do with social policy. Abortion would not be in there. Traditional family would not be in there. Okay? No one saw to it that the ideals of family, the ideals of life, and I would suggest also the ideals of protecting our United States Constitution as it is written. No one put those on the agenda and made sure they stayed there, like Phyllis Schlafly. And I would suggest to you that, the work of the traditional family, which is really her initial work. That's why she fought the ERA. Because she said, and she knew, that the effort wasn't about the government giving equal treatment under the law. That's already in the Constitution. She knew it was about tearing apart the structure and the traditions and the ideals of the nuclear family as God gave it to us. And so she fought it for that reason. And she was right, and she has been proven right, and that fight goes on. And then after the AR was defeated, where she became so well known in connection with the Republican National Committee and the Republican National Conventions, was the Life of the Party events at each 4 years, and making sure that life was absolutely protected in the platform of the Republican Party. That the Republican Party is, was, and must be a pro-life party. And she carried the mandate for life, not just among Republicans, among Americans. And even though that battle goes on, let me suggest to you that we've won a big part of that. That abortion is seen by people who are not activists as an ugly, sad, terrible thing. Now there's more work to be done. And not everyone sees that it is necessarily a murder. But they are seeing damage done to women's lives, the damage done to society, the criminal activities beyond the murder of babies done by the abortionists and in relation to the industries. And they support legislators who want to crack down on that, who want to limit that. And even among those who support the idea of abortion in some cases, it's like, but not partial birth, but not this, but not that, but not this. And instead of seeing the exceptions one direction and calling, well, if it'll save the life of the mother, so I must be pro-choice a little bit, they're seeing the exceptions the other direction and saying, well, I'm pro-life when it comes to this and this and this. I don't like sex selection abortion, so I'm pro-life some. I don't like this kind of abortion, so I'm pro-life some. And they're changing, and so instead of moving closer pro-choice, they're calling themselves more pro-life and moving more and more pro-life. And that's where the movement has been in the discussion in America. And Phyllis Schlafly had a huge impact on that. And you know, calling the events at each national convention the life of the party and involving pro-life as a positive, pleasant, upward, good thing makes a difference. But the big issue and the unfinished work of Phyllis Schlafly, the thing that she was pushing more and more of late, was protecting our United States Constitution as written. Because she's a constitutional scholar, a constitutional lawyer. She knew what she was talking about. And she engaged herself in a very active way in what has become a very uphill battle against efforts to change our Constitution. In some ways back to her original fight against the NFRA and the amendment that was. She sees the wisdom of our founding fathers and the need to preserve the Constitution as written, and in fact to restore it as the law of the land in our country, because frankly, it's not. It's a largely ignored document. And now she's gone. And now she can't do what she's been doing. And others have to pick up the mantle. You know, back during the era of the Roman Empire, there was a slave revolt. Many of you have probably heard of it, Spartacus. And he led slaves away, telling them that they don't need to be slaves. You know, the natural state of man under God is liberty under him, not under other men. And he led them away and created a revolt against the vile Roman Empire. But unfortunately, it didn't succeed in the long run. And as the Roman armies surrounded the camp of the slaves and Spartacus, they really kind of wanted to avoid a bloody battle, because there had been a bunch, and the slaves had won a bunch of them. And so they surrounded them, and the general of the Roman army got up and announced, by whatever means he announced, and he said this one thing: give us Spartacus, we'll execute him, and the rest of you will all live. You'll just have to go back home and serve your masters. It's like only one person, after all the deaths and all the battles and all the war and all the expenses, only one person would be executed for the rebellion, and all the rest could simply go back to being a slave. And the crowd of slaves was hushed, and Spartacus didn't say anything. But one man who admired him and appreciated what he had done to encourage and strengthen and speak of liberty, he shouted out, I am Spartacus, willing to sacrifice his life rather than the leader, rather than the ideal, rather than give up on liberty. But he wasn't alone. Somebody else yelled out, "I'm Spartacus." And another, "I'm Spartacus." A woman, which, was silly. "I'm Spartacus." And many, many, many voices yelled out, "I am Spartacus." Of course, they knew the Romans weren't honest. They were going to get Spartacus, make a show of him, and then they were going to kill a lot of the slaves. But that message of people saying, "I take up the mantle of liberty. I'll take up the mantle of a leader gone before me. I'll be Spartacus," was recorded by their enemies and inspired the Roman Empire and the people in the Roman Empire against their own tyranny because of what those men and women were willing to do. And of course, the crosses lined the Appian Way, which I've been there. Not to the crosses, but to the Appian Way. The crosses, of course, are long gone. And the slaves were massacred. But the message of true liberty goes forward as people were willing to stand up and say, "I will take that mantle." Well, Phyllis is gone. But I'm Phyllis Schlafly.
Here you go. Me too.
That's what we need to say. And let's take up that work of restoring our Constitution against all the arguments and all the stuff and all the things that are being said. The Constitution, as it's written, is great. And the only thing wrong with it today is it's being ignored. It's not being observed honestly. There's nothing else wrong with it. There are many, many people who want to fix it. But the fix is in electing congressmen and electing a president and appointing judges and electing governors and electing legislators and electing judges locally and electing city councilmen, county commissioners, and everyone. Because in our Constitution it says, and they're still doing it, every public official in this country that takes an oath of office raises their hand and swears to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America, even those who are taking offices as dog catchers, if there is such a public office as such. We take that oath. And when I raised my hand and took my oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America, when I became a city councilman, it didn't have an expiration date. It didn't say so long as I'm a city councilman. It was just going to apply to me from there on. I have an obligation to uphold that Constitution, and it doesn't end until I do. So Phyllis no longer needs to, but we do. And if there's anything I can encourage you to do, anything I can inspire you to do, I urge you with all my heart to stand firm for the Constitution of the United States as it is written. I'm not the constitutional scholar that wonderful woman, I hate to even say the word was, but I know she was right, that it deserves to be upheld as written in its fullness without reservation. And with that, I express my appreciation again. Thank you very much.
Richard, if you'll stand for
Yes.
questions,
Of course.
Any questions on both the book and on Phyllis? Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, the thought has occurred to me that even though we maybe through the Constitution and everything was set up on the side of the road, it's still a fact. The end coming up. dedicated to the Constitution. Right now, they feel that the Constitution doesn't mean anything. If you talk to a young person and learn to get down and talk to them about this certain thing, talk about they'll say it doesn't mean anything. The Constitution doesn't mean anything. I heard a young person say that, and I was absolutely floored. They never come out of
But I'm not floored at all. I would look at him and I'd say, you're absolutely right. But it should. Because the only thing that separates us from the Holocaust of Nazi Germany, the only thing that separates us from the Holocaust of Cambodia, the only thing that separates us from the tyranny of South Korea, or North Korea, I'm sorry. Well, South Korea is kind of tyrannical, but North Korea or Cuba is the rule of law. And we don't have it, and you're right.
Because it's not taught in the schools.
We need something that limits government. See, that's what the Constitution was written to do. It wasn't written to tie us at all. It was written to say, government, so far and no further. How do you stop government from doing bad things? The only way is through the rule of law. And if you don't have the Constitution, you've got no basis or strength of law to keep government from hurting you. It is hurting you, and of course it means nothing because it's hurting you. How do you stop that from happening? It has to become important. Yes, sir.
One of the worst things I heard was several years ago, the senator from Colorado, Cassie Schroeder. She said, let's get back to ruling the country. This was when hard time with the blue dress. She says, let's get back to that. Find something wrong so that we can go fix it. We don't need government to fix it. We need government to fix it.
It's, you know, when you go to Washington, D.C., it's really not hard to find something wrong. Because it's Washington, D.C. Okay. You know, and that's, you know, we think government's supposed to rule over us. And we also think, and this is kind of an unfortunate reality about America, we think of ourselves as Americans in a large connection to being governed by Washington, D.C. We connect our identity as Americans to the political reality of our government. You know, other countries aren't that way. French people don't think they're French because they're governed in Paris. Okay? Koreans are Koreans on both sides of the line. One of them has a really bad government, and the other has a really, really, really bad government. But they're all just Koreans. They identify themselves as Koreans because they have a unifying ethnic origin. But that's not true about Americans. We don't have that unifying ethnic origin, but we have a unifying ethic. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. We have an ethic. And from that ethic comes all the other things that make Americans Americans, like the American work ethic, the American dream. The things that make us unique and different are not caused or brought upon us by our government. Government isn't what makes us Americans, and even if there was a last American president, and America stopped being one governmental entity, we would still be Americans. And we, in various states around the country, would still, as one of my favorite authors, Mary Jenkins, says, Americans have more in common with each other than they have in common. Yeah, sure, we kind of joke sometimes about the fact that people in New England can't pronounce the letter R. They park the car. We joke about the fact that up in Seattle, if you're on a street corner, you're in front of a coffee house. You look down the other corner, there's a coffee house. But don't worry, halfway between there in the middle of the block, there's a coffee house. We joke about those distinctions because they are little, minimal distinctions, but the reality is we have so much in common. having traveled many parts of the world, we really do. And it's not government that unifies us. It's the ethic that unifies us. And if we can divorce ourselves from the idea that being an American has something to do with our government, it frees us up to be a little bit more critical when our government violates our Constitution and does things that are wrong. So don't worry. We will still be Americans, and there will always be an America, regardless of where the political lines are drawn. Anybody else?
Very good. Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you very much.